As the day quietly fades and stars begin to whisper above, welcome to Korean History Whispers. Tonight, we gently explore the heart and mind of Shin Saimdang. While history remembers her as the perfect mother and wife, tonight you will discover the passionate artist whose soul blazed with creative fire. Close your eyes and let her whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep. In the autumn of 1504, as golden leaves danced through the mountain air of Gangneung, a child was born whose destiny would reshape the very definition of what it meant to be a woman in Korea. The timing seemed prophetic, as if the universe itself had chosen this moment of seasonal transformation to herald the arrival of someone who would bridge the ancient and the modern, tradition and innovation, duty and dreams. Her father, Shin Saimdang, was a scholar of remarkable sensitivity and progressive thinking. Unlike many men of his era who viewed daughters as temporary additions to the family before marriage, he possessed an almost revolutionary belief in the intellectual potential of women. This was a man who had passed the prestigious Jinsa examination, earning recognition among the kingdom's scholarly elite, yet who chose to dedicate himself not to advancing his own career, but to nurturing the minds of his 5 daughters. The baby girl, initially unnamed but destined to become Shin Saimdang, entered a household where learning was not just encouraged, but celebrated as the highest form of human achievement. Her mother, Lady Lee from the distinguished Yunginli clan, brought her own legacy of strength and determination. This was a woman who would later sacrifice her own flesh, cutting off her finger to save her husband's life, demonstrating a depth of devotion that would become legendary throughout the kingdom. From her earliest moments, the child who would become Shin Saimdang was surrounded by an atmosphere of intellectual curiosity and artistic appreciation. Her father's library contained treasures that most women would never seek: scrolls of poetry and philosophy, historical chronicles and artistic treatises. But in the Shin household, these were not forbidden territories, but invitations to exploration and understanding. As she grew from infant to toddler to young child, her extraordinary capabilities began to manifest in ways that astonished even her scholarly father. While other children her age struggled with basic characters, she was absorbing the complexities of classical literature with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. Her memory was like a perfect vessel, capturing every nuance of meaning and beauty in the texts she encountered. But it was not merely her intellectual gifts that set her apart. By the age of 7, she had discovered something that would define her entire existence: the magical relationship between brush, ink, and imagination. Her first attempts at painting were not the crude efforts typical of children, but sophisticated compositions that revealed an intuitive understanding of artistic principles that scholars spent lifetimes trying to master. The moment that would become legend occurred when she encountered a landscape painting by the master artist Joseon. Instead of simply admiring the work as others might, she studied every brushstroke, every gradation of color, every subtle interplay of light and shadow. That, with the fearless confidence of youth, she attempted to recreate not just the technical aspects of the painting but its emotional essence. When her father discovered what she had done, he stood speechless before her easel. The child had not merely copied Joseon's technique, but had somehow captured the very spirit that animated his work. It was as if she possessed some mystical ability to see beyond the surface of things into their deeper truth. The painting revealed a level of artistic maturity that seemed impossible in someone so young. Word of the prodigy began to spread through the scholarly networks that connected Gangneung to the wider world of Korean intellectual life. Visitors would arrive at the Shin household specifically to witness the phenomenon of a young girl whose artistic abilities seemed to transcend the normal boundaries of age, gender, and training. Yet her father, wise in his understanding of his daughter's nature, protected her from excessive attention while continuing to nurture her extraordinary gifts. Her education expanded beyond painting to encompass all the classical arts considered essential for a truly cultured person. She mastered calligraphy with the same intuitive brilliance she brought to painting, her characters flowing across paper with a grace and precision that reflected both technical mastery and spiritual depth. Poetry became another medium for her creative expression, her verses revealing a sensitivity to beauty and meaning that far exceeded her years. The young Shin Saimdang was particularly drawn to subjects from the natural world, finding in flowers, insects, and birds a complexity and beauty that spoke to something deep within her artistic soul. Her paintings of grapes would eventually become legendary, so perfectly capturing the translucent quality of the fruit and the organic curves of the vines that viewers would swear they could taste the sweetness and feel the texture of what she had created with mere pigments and brush. But perhaps her most remarkable quality was the way she approached her art, not as mere technical exercise, but as a form of spiritual life. Each painting was a meditation, each poem a prayer, each calligraphic character a moment of perfect balance between intention and execution. She understood, even as a child, that true art emerged not from conscious effort alone, but from a harmony between skill and soul that could not be forced or faked. Her father watched her development with a mixture of pride and protective concern. He understood that his daughter possessed gifts that were both blessing and burden, talents that would bring her recognition and fulfillment, but also challenges that few women of their era would be equipped to face. In 16th century Korea, even the most brilliant woman was expected to subordinate her individual aspirations to the demands of family and social duty. Yet Shin Saimdang refused to allow conventional expectations to limit his daughter's potential. He continued to provide her with the finest education available, ensuring that she mastered not only the artistic skills for which she was becoming famous, but also the classical learning that would enable her to move confidently through any intellectual circle. She studied the great philosophical texts, absorbed the lessons of history, and developed the kind of broad cultural knowledge that was typically reserved for the male scholarly elite. The household in Gangneung became a kind of sanctuary where traditional gender boundaries seemed to dissolve in the face of pure intellectual and artistic merit. Shin Saimdang's sisters, too, were encouraged to develop their own talents and interests, creating an environment where feminine achievement was celebrated rather than suppressed. It was a revolutionary approach to family life that would have profound implications for the next generation. As she entered adolescence, Shin Saimdang's reputation began to extend beyond the local scholarly community to reach the highest levels of Korean cultural life. Stories of the young artist's extraordinary abilities traveled along the networks that connected provincial towns to the royal capital, carried by officials, merchants, and travelers who had witnessed her work firsthand. She was becoming not just a local phenomenon, but a national treasure. Yet even as recognition grew, her father remained focused on ensuring that fame did not corrupt or diminish his daughter's essential humanity. He taught her that true greatness lay not in public acclaim but in the sincere pursuit of beauty and truth through her art. The paintings that would make her immortal were not created for external validation, but as expressions of an inner vision that demanded manifestation regardless of worldly consequences. The teenage Shin Saimdang developed a particular mastery of what would become her signature subjects. The delicate insects and flowers that revealed infinite complexity within apparent simplicity. Her paintings of grasshoppers and butterflies captured not just their physical characteristics but something of their essential nature, their place in the larger web of life that connected all living things. Viewers would later claim that her insects seemed ready to leap from the paper, so perfectly had she captured their essence. Her grape paintings, too, reached new levels of sophistication during these formative years. She developed techniques for rendering the translucent quality of the fruit that had never been achieved in Korean art, creating effects that seemed almost magical in their realism. The vines in her compositions possessed an organic vitality that made them appear to grow before the viewer's eyes, each leaf and tendril positioned with perfect natural grace. But it was not just technical mastery that distinguished her work. There was something in her artistic vision that seemed to reveal the divine spark within natural forms, transforming ordinary subjects into windows onto deeper truths about beauty, impermanence, and the interconnectedness of all existence. Her art became a form of visual philosophy, communicating insights about the nature of reality that could not be expressed through words alone. As her 18th birthday approached, bringing with it the inevitability of marriage and the transformation of her life circumstances, Shin Saimdang found herself at a crossroads that would define everything that followed. The young woman who had spent her adolescence freely exploring the realms of art and learning would soon be required to navigate the complex demands of adult womanhood, in a society that offered few models for someone of her extraordinary talents. Yet the foundation her father had provided, the confidence he had instilled in her abilities, and the deep well of creative passion that burned within her soul, would prove strong enough to sustain her through all the challenges ahead. The artist's heart that had been kindled in childhood would continue to burn throughout her life, creating works of beauty that would inspire generations yet unborn. The young woman who would soon take the name Shin Saimdang, meaning one who follows the example of Taeyam, stood poised between the protected world of her childhood and the uncertain demands of the adult responsibilities that awaited her. But she carried within herself something that no external circumstance could diminish. The fire of artistic genius that would transform everything it touched. As twilight deepens and shadows lengthen across ancient valleys, we return to the story of Shin Saimdang. Tonight, we witness the moment when destiny calls a brilliant young woman to choose between the sanctuary of childhood dreams and the demanding realities of adult life. While her heart aches with impossible choices, you will feel the weight of sacrifices that transform artists into legends. The year 1522 brought changes that would forever alter the trajectory of Shin Saimdang's life. At 18, she had reached the age when Korean society demanded that even the most gifted young woman fulfill her primary destiny as wife and mother. The freedom she had enjoyed to pursue her artistic passions would soon be constrained by the elaborate web of duties and expectations that defined married life for women of her social class. Her father, Shin Myunghwa, faced an agonizing dilemma that revealed the depth of his love for his exceptional daughter. Despite his progressive views on female education, he could not protect her indefinitely from the social realities that governed their world. Marriage was not optional for young women of good family, and delaying too long would only limit her options and potentially damage her reputation. The man chosen to be her husband was Lee Won-soo, whose character name was Gangneung, but who was also known by the more poetic name Nan-soo, meaning orchid elegance. He was a scholar from a respectable family, though not one who had achieved the highest levels of examination success. His career would eventually reach the position of inspector in the office of the Inspector General. A respectable but not spectacular achievement that suggested steady competence rather than brilliant genius. What made Lee Won-soo an appropriate match was not his worldly success but his character and his understanding of the extraordinary woman he was to marry. Contemporary accounts describe him as sincere and unassuming, possessed of the kind of steady virtue that formed the foundation of lasting partnerships. More importantly, he demonstrated a respect for Shin Saimdang's artistic gifts that was remarkable for a man of his era. The wedding preparations revealed the profound emotional cost of this necessary transition. When the time came for Shin Saimdang to leave her father's house, Shin Myunghwa reportedly told his new son-in-law with touching honesty that while he had been able to part with his other daughters without excessive grief, sending Shin Saimdang away felt like losing a part of his own soul. The bond between this father and daughter transcended the normal relationships of their time. Rooted in shared intellectual passion and artistic understanding. Perhaps recognizing the difficulty of this separation, the newlyweds did not immediately relocate to Seoul, where Lee Won-soo's career would eventually take him. Instead, they remained in the Gangneung area for 2 years, allowing Shin Saimdang to maintain her connection to the landscapes and family relationships that had nurtured her artistic development. This period of transition provided a bridge between her carefree youth and the more constrained life that awaited her as a married woman. But even this brief reprieve could not postpone indefinitely the reality of her new circumstances. In 1524, 2 years after her marriage, Shin Saimdang finally made the journey to Seoul. Leaving behind the mountain valleys and seaside vistas that had provided endless inspiration for her art. The move represented not just a change of location, but a fundamental transformation in her identity from cherished daughter to responsible wife. The emotional toll of this separation became apparent in ways that revealed the depth of her attachment to her birthplace. According to her son Yulgok's later writings, Shin Saimdang would often be found weeping silently in the middle of the night, overcome by homesickness so intense that sleep became impossible. The woman who had seemed to possess unlimited inner strength found herself struggling with a loneliness that no amount of artistic achievement could completely heal. Her homesickness was not merely sentimental nostalgia, but reflected a deeper understanding of what she had lost. Gangneung represented more than just familiar surroundings. It was the place where her artistic vision had been formed, where every mountain peak and flowing stream had contributed to her understanding of natural beauty. In Seoul, surrounded by the formal constraints of court society and the demands of urban life, she found it difficult to maintain the spiritual connection to nature that had always fueled her creativity. The poem she wrote while crossing Daegwalyeong Pass on one of her return visits to Gangneung became one of the most poignant expressions of this inner conflict. Standing at the mountain summit, looking back toward her beloved hometown, she composed verses that captured the heartbreak of a woman torn between duty and desire, between the life she was required to live and the one her soul yearned for. Leaving my white-haired mother in Limyeong behind, alone I journeyed toward the capital with this heart, turning to look back at the northern village. Only the blue evening mountains appear through flying white clouds. The simple beauty of these lines concealed a profound emotional complexity, revealing a woman whose public composure masked private anguish that few would ever suspect. Yet even as she struggled with the emotional challenges of her new life, Shin Saimdang refused to allow circumstances to diminish her artistic aspirations. The constraints imposed by marriage and motherhood could not extinguish the creative fire that burned within her. If anything, the necessity of pursuing her art within narrower boundaries seemed to intensify her focus and deepen her technical mastery. Her reputation as an artist continued to grow even after her marriage, as word of her extraordinary abilities spread through the networks that connected Seoul's cultural elite. The Pigwan Japji, a collection of miscellaneous records compiled during the reign of King Jeongjong, included her among the most accomplished artists of the era, noting specifically her mastery of landscape painting and her unrivaled skill in depicting grapes and insects. What made these achievements even more remarkable was the fact that she was accomplishing them while fulfilling all the demanding responsibilities expected of a wife and mother in 16th century Korea. Between 1522 and the early 1540s, she gave birth to 7 children, 4 sons named Lee Seon, Lee Byeon, Lee I, and Lee Yu, and 3 daughters who would marry into distinguished families. Each birth required months of recovery. Each child demanded constant attention and education. Yet somehow she continued to find time and energy for her artistic pursuits. The management of this complex life required extraordinary organizational skills and an almost superhuman level of personal discipline. She had to balance the demands of running a household, educating her children, maintaining social relationships with other elite families, and pursuing her own artistic development. The fact that she succeeded in all these areas simultaneously suggests a level of capability that few individuals in any era could match. Her approach to motherhood reflected the same innovative thinking that her father had demonstrated in her own education. Rather than accepting the conventional wisdom that children, especially daughters, needed only minimal formal instruction, she became deeply involved in their intellectual development. Her son Yulgok would later credit his early education entirely to his mother's teaching, noting that she had provided him with the foundation in classical learning that would enable his eventual emergence as one of Korea's greatest philosophers. His educational role extended beyond mere academic instruction to encompass the transmission of cultural values and artistic sensibilities. Through her example and direct teaching, she ensured that her children understood not just the technical aspects of painting and calligraphy, but the spiritual dimensions that transformed craft into art. Her influence can be seen in the later achievements of several of her children, particularly her eldest daughter Meching, who became accomplished in poetry and painting, and her fourth son Liu, who earned recognition for his mastery of the four arts of music, calligraphy, poetry, and painting. The decade of the 1530s represented a period of artistic maturity during which Shin Saimdangs were reached new levels of sophistication and recognition. Her great paintings achieved a legendary status that would endure for centuries, with contemporary observers noting that her technique was so advanced that no other artist could successfully imitate her effects. The translucent quality she achieved in rendering a fruit seemed to capture not just its visual appearance but its essential nature, the way light passed through its skin to reveal the complex interior structure. Her insect paintings do the two, reached extraordinary levels of realism and artistic sophistication. The grasshoppers, butterflies, and other small creatures that appeared in her compositions possessed an almost supernatural vitality, as if they were merely resting on the paper before continuing their natural activities. Contemporary viewers reported being startled by the lifelike quality of these images, expecting the insects to suddenly move or fly away, but it was not merely technical virtuosity that distinguished her work during this period. There was a deeper quality to her artistic vision that seemed to reveal profound truths about the nature of beauty and impermanence. Her paintings functioned as visual meditations on the cycles of life and death, growth and decay, that governed all natural phenomena. Viewers found themselves drawn into contemplation of larger questions about existence and meaning that transcended the immediate subjects she depicted. The recognition she received during these years came not just from other artists and scholars but from the broader cultural elite who understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in Korea. The fact that a woman had achieved such mastery in fields traditionally dominated by men challenged conventional assumptions about gender and creativity in ways that would have lasting implications for future generations. Yet even as her public reputation soared, the private challenges of maintaining her artistic practice within the constraints of domestic life continued to exact their toll. The constant demands of child rearing, household management, and social obligations left little time for the extended periods of concentration that serious artistic work required. She had to develop new methods of creative practice that could accommodate interruptions and fragmented schedules. Her solution was to integrate her artistic pursuits more fully into her daily life, treating every moment as a potential opportunity for observation and creative insight. The flowers in her garden became subjects for study. The insects that flew through her courtyard provided inspiration for new compositions. The changing seasons offered endless variations on familiar themes, rather than requiring special conditions for creativity. She learned to find artistic potential in the ordinary moments of domestic existence. This approach to art making reflected a philosophical sophistication that would influence her work for the remainder of her career. She understood that true artistic vision emerged not from withdrawal from life but from deeper engagement with its complexities and contradictions. The tension between her roles as artist and mother, between individual aspiration and social duty, became a source of creative energy, rather than merely an obstacle to overcome. As the 1530s drew to a close, Shin Saimdang found herself approaching 40, with a sense of both accomplishment and unfulfilled potential. She had successfully navigated the challenging transition from protected daughter to responsible wife and mother while maintaining and even expanding her artistic reputation. Her children were developing into remarkable individuals who would carry forward many of her values and talents. Yet she also understood that time was becoming an increasingly precious resource. The demands of raising 7 children and managing a complex household left ever smaller windows for the intensive artistic work that her soul craved. The decade ahead would test her ability to balance these competing demands, while creating the masterpieces that would ensure her place in the pantheon of Korean cultural achievement. The woman who had once stood at Daegwallyeong Pass, torn between 2 worlds, had learned to inhabit both simultaneously without sacrificing her essential integrity. The artist's heart that had been kindled in childhood continued to burn brightly, finding new forms of expression that honored both her personal vision and her responsibilities to family and society. As candlelight flickers against ancient silk, we continue our journey through the remarkable life of Shin Saimdang. Tonight, we witness the flowering of artistic genius that would transcend the boundaries of time and gender. While her brush captures the essence of all living things, you will feel the profound beauty that emerges when talent meets unwavering dedication. Close your eyes and let her whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep. The 1540s dawned with Shin Saimdang entering what would prove to be the most creatively productive period of her life. At 30 with then 6, she had achieved a delicate equilibrium between her roles as devoted mother and visionary artist, finding ways to channel the intense demands of domestic life into fuel for her creative fire. The woman who had once wept for her distant homeland had discovered how to transform longing itself into artistic inspiration. Her studio, though modest by the standards of male scholars who enjoyed spacious retreats, had become a sanctuary where time seemed to bend according to different laws. Here, surrounded by carefully arranged brushes, pigments ground from precious minerals, and papers selected for their perfect texture and absorption, she could enter a state of concentrated focus that allowed her to access the deepest wells of her artistic vision. The process by which she created her masterpieces had evolved into something approaching ritual. Each painting session began with a period of quiet contemplation, during which she would study her chosen subject with an intensity that seemed to penetrate beyond mere surface appearance into the essential nature of the thing itself. Whether examining a cluster of grapes hanging heavy with juice, or observing the delicate movements of a grasshopper among autumn flowers, she sought to understand not just what she was seeing, but what it meant to be that particular manifestation of life. Her breakthrough came with a revolutionary approach to depicting transparency and luminosity that had never been achieved in Korean painting. Working with grapes, she developed techniques that seemed to capture actual light passing through the translucent skin of the fruit, creating effects so convincing that viewers would instinctively reach out to touch what appeared to be 3-dimensional objects existing in real space, rather than images created with ink and pigment on flat paper. The secret lay not in any single innovation but in her integration of multiple artistic elements into a unified vision that transcended. Her brushwork possessed a rhythmic quality that seemed to pulse with the natural energy of growing things. Her color choices reflected not just accurate observation, but an intuitive understanding of how different hues could evoke emotional responses that enhanced the viewer's connection to the subject. Most remarkably, she had learned to paint time itself. Her grape clusters seemed to exist in the perfect moment of ripeness, neither too young nor beginning to decay, captured at the precise instant when their beauty reached its absolute peak. Her insects appeared frozen in natural poses that suggested movement about to resume, as if they were merely pausing for a heartbeat before continuing their eternal dance through garden and field. The recognition that greeted these achievements was unprecedented for a female artist in Korean history. The Pigwan Japji recorded contemporary amazement at her abilities, noting that scholars and artists of the highest rank would travel great distances simply to view her latest works. More significantly, she began to receive commissions from some of the most prestigious families in the kingdom. A form of recognition typically reserved for male artists with official appointments and scholarly credentials. But it was not merely her technical mastery that distinguished Shin Saimdang's work from that of her contemporaries. There was something in her artistic vision that seemed to reveal the divine spark within ordinary subjects, transforming simple observations of natural phenomena into profound meditations on the interconnectedness of all existence. Her paintings functioned as windows onto deeper truths about beauty, impermanence, and the sacred nature of life itself. This philosophical dimension of her art reflected the comprehensive education she had received from her father, and continued to pursue throughout her adult life. Unlike many artists who focused primarily on developing technical skills, she had cultivated a broad understanding of classical literature, philosophy, and natural science that informed every aspect of her creative work. Her paintings were not just visual experiences but intellectual and spiritual journeys that engaged viewers on multiple levels simultaneously. Her influence on her children during this period proved as significant as her artistic achievements. Her third son, born in 1536 and initially named Yi, showed early signs of the exceptional intellectual abilities that would eventually make him famous throughout East Asia as the philosopher Yulgok. From his earliest years, she recognized in him a mind capable of grasping the most complex ideas, and a moral sensitivity that marked him as potentially one of the great ethical teachers of his generation. Her approach to educating this remarkable child reflected the same innovative thinking that characterized her artistic practice. Rather than relying on conventional pedagogical methods, she developed teaching strategies tailored specifically to his unique capabilities and interests. She understood that a mind like his required not just information but wisdom, not just knowledge but understanding of how to apply learning in service of human flourishing. The lessons she provided went far beyond the standard curriculum expected for young scholars. She introduced him to the classical texts that formed the foundation of Confucian learning. But she also ensured that he understood the practical applications of philosophical principles in daily life. Through her own example, she demonstrated how intellectual achievement could be combined with moral integrity and artistic sensitivity to create a fully developed human being. Most importantly, she taught him to see connections between apparently disparate fields of knowledge. Her artistic practice became a laboratory for exploring questions about perception, beauty, and the relationship between inner vision and external reality that would later inform his philosophical investigations. The precision required for masterful painting taught him about the importance of careful observation and patient dedication that would characterize his approach to scholarly research. The bond between mother and son during these formative years was extraordinary even by the standards of Korean family relationships, which placed enormous emphasis on filial devotion and parental influence. They shared not just affection but intellectual companionship, engaging in discussions about art, literature, and philosophy that enriched both their understanding. The future sage was learning from a master whose wisdom extended far beyond any single domain of expertise. Her influence on her other children was equally profound, though it manifested in different ways according to their individual temperaments and abilities. Her eldest daughter, known as Meching, inherited both her mother's artistic talents and her love of poetry, developing skills that would earn recognition in her own right. Her fourth son Giskye displayed such mastery in music, calligraphy, poetry, and painting that he became known for his command of the four arts, a rare achievement that reflected the comprehensive cultural education he had received under his mother's guidance. But perhaps the most significant aspect of her influence was the way she transmitted not just specific skills or knowledge, but a fundamental attitude toward learning. She taught them that true achievement required not just natural talent but relentless dedication to improvement. Not just individual excellence but contribution to the broader welfare of society. During the mid-1540s, Shin Saimdang's artistic reputation reached its absolute peak. Her grape paintings had become so famous that attempts to copy them circulated throughout the kingdom, though none achieved the luminous quality that made her originals unmistakable. Her insect studies were regarded as the finest examples of their type in Korean art, combining scientific accuracy with poetic vision in ways that had never been attempted before. The technical innovations she had developed began to influence other artists who attempted to incorporate her methods into their own work. Her approach to depicting transparency and texture provided new possibilities for Korean painting that would be explored by subsequent generations. More broadly, her success challenged traditional assumptions about the relationship between gender and artistic capability, opening doors for future female artists who would follow in her footsteps. Yet even as external recognition reached unprecedented levels, Shin Saimdang remained focused on the internal rewards of artistic creation, rather than worldly acclaim. Her diary entries from this period, preserved in family records, reveal a woman deeply committed to continuous improvement in her craft, constantly experimenting with new techniques and subjects in pursuit of ever greater beauty and truth in her work. She had also begun to understand that her time for intensive artistic practice was necessarily limited. The demands of raising 7 children, maintaining a complex household, and fulfilling social obligations left increasingly narrow windows for the extended periods of concentration that her most ambitious projects required. This awareness lent a new urgency to her work, as if she understood that each painting might be among her last opportunities to fully express her artistic vision. Her response was to intensify her focus on creating works that would endure long after the circumstances that constrained her current life had passed away. She began selecting subjects and compositions with an eye toward their lasting significance, creating paintings that would continue to inspire and instruct viewers for generations yet unborn. Every brushstroke carried the weight of her accumulated wisdom and experience, distilled into visual form for the benefit of those who would encounter her work in centuries to come. The late 1540s brought new challenges that would test her ability to maintain her artistic practice while adapting to changing family circumstances. Her husband's appointment to administrative positions that required travel meant longer periods when she bore sole responsibility for household management and child supervision. These added pressures might have overwhelmed someone less dedicated, but Shin Saimdang found ways to transform even these constraints into opportunities for creative growth. She began developing portable artistic projects that could be pursued during brief intervals between domestic duties. Her smaller compositions from this period display an intensity and precision that seemed to concentrate all her artistic energy into compact formats that could be completed despite frequent interruptions. These works proved that artistic excellence depended not on ideal conditions, but on the passion and skill that an artist brought to whatever circumstances life provided. As the decade drew to a close, Shin Saimdang had achieved something unprecedented in Korean cultural history. She had proven that a woman could reach the highest levels of artistic achievement while fulfilling all the traditional expectations placed upon wives and mothers. Her success created new possibilities for understanding what women might accomplish when given proper education and encouragement to develop their natural abilities. But perhaps her greatest achievement was more reaching. Through her art, her teaching, and her example, she had demonstrated that creativity and domestic responsibility need not be opposing forces, but could be woven together into a life of extraordinary richness and meaning. The brushstrokes that captured the essence of grapes and grasshoppers had also painted a new vision of what it meant to be a complete human being, transcending the artificial boundaries that society had constructed around gender and achievement. The woman who had once stood torn between two worlds had created a third way, a path that honored both individual genius and social responsibility. Her legacy would extend far beyond her paintings to influence countless future generations, who would look to her example for proof that the human spirit could flourish even within the most constrained circumstances. As the final candle burns low and silence embraces the world, we reach the closing chapter of Shin Saimdang's extraordinary journey. Tonight, we witness how a brilliant life, though cut short, blooms eternal through the hearts and minds it touched. While her earthly voice grows quiet, you will feel the immortal song that genius leaves behind for all who seek beauty and truth. The year 1541 marked a significant transition in Shin Saimdang's life, as her family finally settled permanently in Seoul. At 37, she had reached an age when most women of her era would be entering the quieter phases of middle age. Focused primarily on managing established households and overseeing the careers of adult children. But for Shin Saimdang, this relocation represented not an ending but a transformation. An opportunity to engage more fully with the sophisticated cultural life of the capital, while maintaining the artistic vision that had defined her existence. The Seoul of the 1540s was a city pulsing with intellectual and artistic energy. The royal court patronized painters, calligraphers, and poets who created works that set standards for the entire kingdom. Scholarly academies attracted the brightest minds from across Korea, fostering debates and innovations that would influence East Asian thought for centuries. For an artist of Shin Saimdang's caliber, this environment offered both inspiration and validation on a scale that provincial life could never provide. Her reputation had preceded her arrival, carried by the networks of scholars, officials, and artists who had encountered her work during their travels. The woman whose grape paintings had become legendary throughout the kingdom, found herself at the center of Seoul's most sophisticated cultural circles. Sought out by collectors and connoisseurs, who understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in Korean art history. Yet even as external recognition reached new heights, Shin Saimdang remained grounded in the fundamental values that had shaped her approach to both art and life. Her studio in Seoul became a gathering place not just for established artists and scholars but for young people seeking guidance in developing their own creative abilities. She understood that true mastery carried with it the responsibility to nurture the next generation of artists and thinkers. Her teaching methods, refined through years of educating her own children, proved equally effective with students who came from outside her family circle. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to recognize individual potential and develop personalized approaches that brought out the best in each student's unique capabilities. Her influence during these years extended far beyond her own artistic production to encompass the formation of an entire generation of Korean cultural leaders. The most remarkable testament to her educational philosophy was the continued development of her son Yulgok, who was now reaching intellectual maturity under her careful guidance. The young man who would eventually become one of Korea's greatest philosophers showed clear evidence of his mother's influence in his approach to learning. His integration of artistic sensitivity with rigorous logical thinking, and his understanding that true wisdom required both intellectual achievement and moral cultivation. But it was not just her famous son who reflected her educational success. All her children demonstrated the benefits of her innovative approach to child rearing, displaying combinations of artistic talent, scholarly ability, and ethical integrity that marked them as products of exceptional parenting. Her daughters, in particular, achieved levels of cultural sophistication that were remarkable for women of their era, providing evidence that her father's progressive views on female education had been passed down through another generation. The decade of the 1540s also saw Shin Saimdang's artistic work reach new levels of philosophical depth and technical perfection. Her paintings from this period display a mature vision that seemed to penetrate beyond surface appearances into the essential nature of existence itself. The insects and flowers that had long been her favorite subjects were now rendered with a spiritual intensity that transformed them into symbols of larger truths about life, death, and the eternal cycles that governed all natural phenomena. Her grape paintings, already legendary for their technical innovation, achieved a new dimension of meaning during these years. Contemporary observers noted that viewing her work induced a kind of meditative state in which the boundaries between observer and observed seemed to dissolve. The translucent fruit hanging in perfect clusters became more than mere representation. It became a window onto the divine creativity that manifested itself through all forms of natural beauty. This deepening spiritual dimension of her art reflected not just technical mastery but a lifetime of contemplation about the relationship between human creativity and the larger patterns that structured the universe. She had come to understand painting not as mere craft or even art in the conventional sense, but as a form of spiritual practice that could reveal truths unavailable through any other means of investigation. Her influence on contemporary artistic practice was profound and far-reaching. Other painters began attempting to incorporate her innovations into their own work, though few achieved more than superficial imitation of her techniques. What they could not replicate was the unique combination of technical skill, philosophical depth, and spiritual insight that made her work distinctive. She had created an entirely new category of artistic achievement that transcended existing boundaries between different forms of cultural expression. The recognition she received during these peak years came not just from fellow artists but from the highest levels of Korean society. Scholars who normally concerned themselves only with literary and philosophical matters found themselves drawn to her paintings as visual embodiments of ideas they struggled to express through words alone. Government officials whose primary interests lay in administration and policy discovered in her work a kind of beauty that reminded them of values beyond mere practical efficiency. Yet even as her public reputation soared to unprecedented heights, those closest to Shin Saimdang began to notice subtle changes that suggested the immense pressures she had sustained throughout her adult life were beginning to exact their toll. The woman who had successfully balanced artistic genius with domestic responsibility for nearly 3 decades was showing signs of the exhaustion that such an ambitious life inevitably produced. Her health, which had always seemed robust enough to support her demanding schedule, began to show the effects of years spent rising before dawn to paint in stolen hours before household duties began, staying awake late into the night to complete works that demanded extended concentration, and maintaining the kind of mental intensity that her artistic vision required. The physical demands of bearing and raising 7 children, combined with the emotional stress of constantly negotiating between competing claims on her time and energy, had accumulated into a burden that even her extraordinary constitution could not indefinitely sustain. In 1550, her husband Lee Won-soo received an appointment as water transport judge, a position that required him to travel frequently to oversee the complex logistics of moving grain and other essential supplies throughout the kingdom. These duties took him away from Seoul for extended periods, leaving Shin Saimdang to manage an increasingly complex household, while continuing her artistic work and educational responsibilities. The additional pressures might have overwhelmed someone less dedicated, but Shin Saimdang adapted with the same innovative spirit she had always brought to challenges. She developed new systems for managing her time and responsibilities that allowed her to maintain both her artistic output and her family obligations. Yet those who knew her best could see that the effort required to sustain this level of performance was becoming increasingly costly. Her paintings from this period display a new urgency, as if she understood intuitively that her time for creative work was becoming limited. Each composition was executed with a precision and intensity that seemed to concentrate a lifetime of artistic development into individual works of breathtaking beauty and emotional power. These late paintings functioned as a kind of artistic testament, distilling everything she had learned about beauty, truth, and the human condition into visual form. The spring of 1551 brought an unexpected crisis that would transform triumph into tragedy with the sudden swiftness that marked all the great turning points of her life. While her husband was away on official business, accompanied by their sons Seon and Yulgok, Shin Saimdang fell seriously ill with a condition that would prove beyond the medical knowledge of her era to treat effectively. The illness struck with devastating speed, giving her little time to prepare for what she must have realized would be her final separation from the family and artistic work that had defined her existence. At 47, She was still in what should have been the prime of her creative life, with decades of potential achievement stretching ahead. Yet fate had determined that her extraordinary journey would end just as she was reaching the full maturity of her artistic and intellectual powers. Her death on the 17th day of the 5th lunar month in 1551 sent shockwaves through the entire Korean cultural community. The woman who had seemed to possess unlimited creative energy, who had successfully navigated every challenge that life presented, had been claimed by forces beyond human control. The loss was felt not just by her immediate family, but by the countless students, colleagues, and admirers who had found inspiration in her example. The immediate aftermath of her death revealed the true extent of her influence on Korean society. Tributes poured in from scholars, artists, and officials who testified to the ways her work and example had enriched their understanding of what human beings could accomplish when talent was combined with dedication and moral purpose. Her paintings, already treasured during her lifetime, became even more precious as tangible reminders of genius that could never be replaced. But perhaps the most significant testimony to her lasting impact was the trajectory of her children's subsequent achievements. Yulgok, profoundly shaped by his mother's educational philosophy and moral example, would go on to become one of the most influential thinkers in Korean history, developing philosophical systems that would guide Korean intellectual life for centuries. His success reflected not just his natural abilities, but the foundation his mother had provided through years of patient teaching and moral guidance. Her other children, too, carried forward aspects of her legacy in their own achievements. Her daughter Meching became recognized as an accomplished poet and artist in her own right. Her son Yiyu achieved mastery in multiple artistic disciplines that earned him recognition as one of the most cultured individuals of his generation. Each of their successes testified to the effectiveness of the educational methods she had pioneered, and the lasting influence of her example in the decades following her death. Shin Saimdang's reputation continued to grow as subsequent generations discovered new dimensions of meaning in her artistic and educational legacy. Her paintings were studied not just as beautiful objects, but as repositories of wisdom about the relationship between human creativity and natural beauty. Her approach to child rearing was analyzed and emulated by families seeking to nurture exceptional abilities in their own children. Most significantly, she had created a new model for understanding the relationship between individual achievement and social responsibility. Her life demonstrated that personal genius need not be selfish or isolated but could be channeled into contributions that enriched entire communities. She had shown that a woman could reach the highest levels of artistic achievement while fulfilling all the traditional expectations placed upon wives and mothers. The transformation of her historical reputation over the centuries that followed reflected changing understanding of her significance. Initially remembered primarily as the mother of a great philosopher, she gradually came to be recognized as a genius in her own right, whose contributions to Korean culture were independently valuable. Modern scholars understand her as a pioneering figure who challenged conventional boundaries and created new possibilities for future generations. Her paintings, carefully preserved through centuries of political upheaval and social change, continue to inspire contemporary artists and art lovers, who find in them a timeless beauty that transcends the specific circumstances of their creation. The grapes that seemed to glow with inner light, the insects that appeared ready to fly from the paper, the flowers that captured the eternal moment of perfect bloom, all testify to a vision that transformed ordinary subjects into windows onto the infinite. But perhaps her greatest legacy lies not in any specific achievement, but in the example she provided of a life lived with unwavering commitment to both personal excellence and service to others. She demonstrated that the highest human aspirations could be pursued even within the most constrained circumstances, that creativity could flourish alongside responsibility, and that individual genius could contribute to the collective wisdom of humanity. The woman who had once stood at Daegwalyeong Pass torn between love for her homeland and duty to her family, had ultimately transcended all such divisions through the integrating power of artistic vision. Her life became a masterpiece as carefully composed as any of her paintings, each element contributing to a harmonious whole that continues to inspire all who encounter her story. As we close this chapter of Whispered Memories, remember that Shin Saimdang's true legacy lies not in the past, but in the future she made possible. Every artist who refuses to accept artificial limitations, every mother who nurtures her children's unique potentia, every person who seeks to combine personal achievement with service to others, carries forward something of her spirit into the continuing story of human possibility. Close your eyes and let these whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep.